At first, it all seemed like the usual women's troubles and gossip, but then the smell of ash, a hint of reddish-brown, and an old inventory list in which one line changed destinies intervened. Hello, I am a male storyteller. Please write in the comments where you are listening to this story, and I wish you pleasant listening. At the beginning of the 17th century, when barrels were smoked at the Valost market and laundry was beaten with wooden beaters on the riverbanks, a laundress named Aksinya lived by the ravine. Her house was crooked, but the stove heated evenly, and canvases of various ages were drying on poles by the window. Government cloth, merchant pillowcases, monastery tablecloths. She worked for anyone who brought her something. The poor gave her a handful of grain. The rich sent her sauerkraut and radishes, sometimes a stingy penny. Aksinya could recognize fabric at first glance. She noticed how linen rang when stretched, how gray cloth stretched toward blue after winter, freezing in the snow, how the sour smell of whey removed the yellowish tinge. Her grandmother taught her to boil ash, watch the foam, and keep in mind how many times the canvas had been rinsed in running water. They said that if she took a sheet in her hands, she could tell whether it had been touched by joy, tears, or someone else's cunning. In the spring, when carts ready for weddings began to appear in the yards, a wealthy merchant arrived in the district. His wife held herself proudly, and his son, the groom, stood silently, as if he were already older than his voice. Aksinya was told that there would be a celebration, and that propriety would require the sheet to be displayed, as was customary. The essence of the ritual was simple and crude. In the morning after the wedding night, the relatives would look at the fabric to ensure that the family's honor remained unquestionable. The ashes of the ritual were heavy as a wet branch, and the word of that ritual was higher than a woman's voice. On the evening before the wedding, a bundle was brought to her laundry room. It was brought by the butler from the groom's house. He said that the mistress had ordered the sheets to be bleached and folded neatly. He added that it was for the sake of order. Aksinya noticed how he held the bundle. His hand was not that of a craftsman, without calluses, but strong, accustomed to keys, not to chisels. She did not answer, only nodded. At night, aspen logs crackled in the stove, and the smell of ash reminded her that it was too early to sleep. She untied the knot by touch. The canvas was fresh, but there was something foreign in it. The fabric did not rustle as usual, but seemed to pull to one side. She brought the canvas to her nose. The smell was not blood. Real blood darkens quickly, giving off iron, dull, like wet rust. This was different. A tart, spicy note, as if from a dye shop. She squeezed the corner of the sheet and saw a faint but strange reddish-brown tint on the edge. This is what madder root with alum gives when you fool a simpleton. The solution eats deep and stays even. Aksinya knew this because once in winter she was given a merchant's sash to bleach, and she tried to remove the stains from it after the boys had teased her. Then she made a mistake, mistaking the red thread for blood, and then learned to her shame how madder does not give off an iron smell and does not turn black in the air. Since then, she tried not to confuse the smell with the color. In the morning at the market, everyone was talking about the wedding. Wedding guests walked through puddles, roosters crowed from barns, and fishermen argued over the price of dried fish. Aksinya approached a stall where a tiny peddler was selling herbs and bark. She noticed a dried root in his box. He said it was dye, suitable for fabric. Aksinya nodded and remembered the face of the boy standing nearby, twisting a long cord in his hands. That boy was the butler's servant. In the evening, the ritual began as planned. The groom's relatives and the bride's relatives came to the hut. The old people sat on benches, while the young people whispered. A sheet was brought out. It already had a stain of the right color on it, even, as if marked by a hand more careful than nature itself. The mother-in-law raised her eyebrows, and the bride's father turned pale. Someone said that everything was clear, and there was no point in arguing. Someone added that the dowry now had to be increased. Otherwise, there would be gossip. They would sort it out in the district court in the morning, they said, but everyone already had an opinion. Aksenia stood in the corner. She saw that the bride had neither anger nor tears, as if her tears had dried up in advance while she was clenching her hands in the guest closet. Aksenia noticed how the bride adjusted the knot on her sleeve. The knot was special, her older sister had taught her. This knot was made in their family. Aksenia remembered her late mother. She had once served a widow in the same village, and she also remembered her sister Varvara, who had given birth to a daughter in a stranger's yard during a storm, and, out of desperation, had given the girl away to be raised by a distant acquaintance. Then everything fell silent, and the memory faded into a dirty streak. In the morning, the district court received the people. The bench for complainants was crowded. The clerk spread his arms and said that the honor of the family was important, that one must listen to relatives and look at the evidence. The butler stood next to his masters, his eyes cold. He said that the sheet spoke for itself. Aksenia stood up and asked to see the canvas. She said that blood did not smell like this stain smelled, that the color was too even, as if it had been applied. She said that she had samples of bleaching that could be tested. Someone smirked. The butler snorted and said that the laundress had a tongue longer than her share. The clerk, old and dry, asked her to explain how she could tell the difference when everyone could already see the color. Then Aksenia asked for a bucket of warm water, a little lye, and sour milk, which an old woman had brought for her morning drink. She said that blood darkens and curdles, and if you rub it, it will crumble and form lumps, but the dye juice of madder with alum stays even and does not give off an iron smell. She showed how the corner of the sheet, when dipped in sour milk, did not change its appearance, although it should have. She ran her finger along the edge and showed an imprint without a metallic note. The clerk listened silently. He said that words alone could not destroy the word of the clan. He asked for the inventory and records of the groom's estate to be brought to him. The clerk was old, and he understood how important lists were when everyone was inclined to believe rumors. He went to his office. At that moment, the crowd was in an uproar, and the bride's father turned pale. Aksenia stood by the wall and counted in her mind how many times the canvas had been rinsed so that it would take the dye. She counted and saw before her eyes the long stem of the bark, and how in winter it was taken out to be bleached in the snow, and in spring the yellowish color was removed with whey. She knew that whoever had made the forgery was in a hurry, because the traces of madder on the edge betrayed a hasty hand. Towards evening, torches were lit in the court. The old clerk returned and said that the groom's inventory showed the purchase of dye root and alum in recent weeks. He added that fabric from the groom's house had recently been taken out to be boiled, and not for festive decorations, because the washing was a secret. The steward flinched, but pulled himself together. The clerk asked for the peddler from the market to be brought in. Not only he came, but also the boy who twisted the cord. The peddler said that he sold the root to a man from the groom's house, that the payment was made in goatskins, and that the steward's servant came twice. The boy said he had seen a sheet being dried in the bathhouse at night, and that the owner had ordered him not to tell anyone. He was afraid, but he said this, looking at the floor, and added that the butler had promised him an extra pot of porridge. The hairs on the back of people's necks stood on end, but it was not the news of blood, but the news of a stranger's hand. The words fell into place like logs in a masonry, but the story had another twist, and that twist came from an old knot on the bride's sleeve. When the court was almost ready to reach a decision, Aksenia asked to see the canvas again. She unfolded the edge and saw a darn. Only one woman could have made such a darn, her late mother. The stitching was even, but with a slight shift to the right. Her mother's fingers always tended to drift there. Aksenia felt a chill. She remembered how, many years ago, her sister Varvara had given her newborn daughter to be raised by a widow from a neighboring village because she herself was weak and could not support 2 children. And the widow then served the same family in which the scandal was now unfolding. The widow sewed, did laundry, and sometimes asked Aksenia's mother to mend sheets. So this fabric was from old stocks, sewn in their hut when Varvara was still alive. This meant that today's bride could be the very girl who had been given away. Aksenia looked at the scar on her wrist. Varvara's daughter should have had a tiny scar from a child's needle, the kind that happens when a baby is dressed in a hurry. The bride adjusted her sleeve, and Aksenia saw a barely noticeable white stripe on her skin. A voice inside her seemed to tell her that blood ties are not questioned, but knots speak quietly and truthfully. She approached the bride's father, who had brought her to this ritual and had called her his daughter for many years. He was not poor. He traded in salt. She told him that she had seen the knot, that it was their shared knot. He replied that he knew. Many years ago, the girl had been given to him, and he had accepted her as his own because he had once failed to help Varvara, refusing her a small favor from which troubles grow. He confessed that he wanted to atone for that long-ago refusal, so he raised the girl as his own. He said that he had been young and proud then, but later realized that pride does not feed the conscience. He spoke softly, and only the clerk and Aksenia heard him. This conversation did not negate the fact that the ritual concealed someone else's cunning, but it revealed a hidden kinship and stretched a thread between the poor laundress and the bride, like between the banks of a narrow ford. Despite all this, the groom's family did not want to back down. The mother-in-law pressed on. The butler remained silent, but there was calculation in his eyes. Then the clerk said that it was no longer just about the sheet. He ordered that the government-issued bleached canvases, which were stored in chests in the warehouse, be brought in. He wanted to compare them. The chest was brought in. Aksenia felt a chill inside. She saw the same darning on the government-issued canvas as on the sheet. It turned out that the butler had not only dyed it, but also taken out government property to cover his tracks. This was no longer about a woman's honor, but about government property. The clerk immediately became more assertive. He said that government property was treated differently. Then the groom's house trembled. The master realized that the matter had taken a different turn. Night fell when the court ended with a temporary decision. The ritual was canceled, and the sheet was declared a forgery. The clerk said that the government property would be sorted out in the morning, and for now, everyone should go home. The bride's father left the hut like a man who had regained his voice. The bride walked beside him, silent as an icy edge, ready to let go of spring. Aksenia also went home. She felt uneasy. She knew that the butler would not calm down. He held too much power. A single splinter of wood burned in her home. She felt under the bench for the bag of madder root she had bought from the peddler that afternoon. She realized that in the morning she would prepare samples and show everyone how the color held and how the truth came out when water was not added. At night, someone knocked on the door. The knocks were hesitant, like those of a person who was used to entering without asking. She did not open the door. The knocking became louder. Aksenia thought about a knife, but she didn't have a better knife than the kitchen one with a broken tip. She took a log and moved the bolt. A strange voice crept through the crack and told her to give back the sheet. Otherwise she would be in trouble. The voice belonged to a servant, not the butler. Aksenia replied loudly that she had nothing that belonged to anyone else. The servant said he knew there was a piece in her chest and that the master would take what he wanted. She felt anger rise in her chest at the stranger's hand in her house. She grabbed the pot of whey, tipped it into the crack, and a scream came from the darkness. The servant jumped back. She put the stopper in and waited for silence. It was an ordinary evening, with the laundress's table covered with linen and a mug of kvass, but the night decided to turn into a thriller. An ordinary thing, a latch, became a border. In the morning, the whole village was talking about how someone had tried to take something from Aksinya by force. People began to understand that a sheet was not a harmless rag, but someone's noose. Thus, a household trifle became a threat, and from that moment on, the case took a new turn. Around noon, an unexpected guest arrived at the Volost. It was an old clerk from a neighboring district, the same one who had once entered the inventory of canvases from the late widow's house where Aksinya's mother had served. He came because he had heard from his nephew, a clerk, that there was trouble in the neighboring district over a sheet and government canvas. He brought with him an old book with a stain from spilled ink on its leather cover. Inside was a line about canvas, a patch added by the laundress at the widow's request, and a mark next to it. He said that he had personally compiled the inventory, that such patches were rare because they asked for the edge to be repaired with a special stitch. His word turned out to be the key that money couldn't buy. He was not rich or powerful, but he was the bearer of memory. At that moment, he became the unexpected benefactor who intervened and changed the course of events with a single decision. He showed what honest lists look like, where the crowd is noisy. People learned that there was indeed only one government-issued canvas, which meant that the butler had stolen it, mixing personal and government property, and then tried to cover it up with a woman's misfortune. The groom's house shook once more. The owner, a man of means but not of iron will, realized that his roof was on fire. He wanted to shift the blame onto the butler, but the latter stood his ground. The butler whispered to the owner that he would show him the paper where the owner had ordered the dye to be bought. The owner recoiled. Aksinya watched all this from the sidelines. Suddenly, she saw the boy who had been twisting the rope at the peddler's door. He looked at her, as if he knew that she was the only one who could get him out of this mess. She nodded to him. He approached the clerk and said that the butler had ordered him to take the sheet from the laundress at night. He added that the next day, the master had seen the butler drying the canvas in the bathhouse and had not stopped him. The clerk realized that the knot had been untied. He turned to the court and said that the forgery had been proven, that the bride's honor had been tarnished not by the truth, but by someone else's will. The district court's verdict was brief. The ritual with the sheet was abolished in this district. The butler was taken into custody, and the master was ordered to pay a fine for the damage and to apologize to the bride's family. The bride's father exhaled slowly, like a man who had finally put down a heavy burden. The bride raised her eyes, and in them there was not triumph, but weary calm. Aksinya stood at the threshold, her hands trembling. She was not used to people looking at her with respect. She was a laundress who always smelled of lye. That day, the old clerk approached her and said that he had seen her working with water and how she had shown people the color of truth. He said that the government laundry needed someone who could distinguish between smells and marks, someone who could look at white and see the fingerprints of strangers on it. He offered her the position of guardian of clean canvases so that no one else would mix false paint with people's destinies. She did not immediately understand what this meant. Then it dawned on her. Her poor work, which many considered a woman's trifle, had become a government job. It was higher than her previous position, but it did not break her hands. Thus, the hidden talent of a simple person went against status. Poverty and wealth switched places for a moment, and the poor laundress found herself holding not only laundry, but also the right to say what was clean and what was not. While the village was in an uproar, another thread was brewing in Aksinya's heart. She realized that the bride, the girl who had wiped away her tears when she saw the fake canvas, was the very one who had once been given away. She told herself that blood does not ask for letters, but memory has a long reach. She approached the bride's father and said that she remembered how he had once failed to help her sister, but now he had carried a stranger's girl out of the mud in his arms. He replied that he lived with it and was glad that fate, albeit crookedly, had put him where he could make amends. He said that the bride would remain his daughter, as she had been, and that no ritual could decide whose heart beat in the house. Towards evening, a woman came to Aksinia's laundry room, an elderly woman with tired eyes. She said that in her youth she had been with the widow whom Aksinia's mother had served, and that she had seen her darning the hem with a special stitch. She added that she knew about Varvara's child, but had kept silent at the time out of fear. She asked Aksinia for forgiveness. Aksinia sat down on a bench and stared into the stove for a long time. She did not know who needed peace more, herself, that woman, or the bride. She thought that there was dirt that could be removed with soap, and there was other dirt that could only be removed by action. The village took up a new habit. The men who had previously laughed at the laundress and her words about madder and alum now asked her if the canvas would fade. Old women brought her scraps of cloth and asked her to explain why one corner was yellower than another. Aksinia answered simply. She said that snow removes yellowness better than the winter sun, that whey makes the fabric softer if you don't overdo it, that dye stays inside if it is kept with alum, and that lies stay inside if they are kept out of fear. Her words began to spread throughout the courtyards, but the story did not end there. The butler was under guard, and the servant whispered to anyone who would listen. The servant said that the butler would not forgive the laundress, that the rich do not tolerate defeat. Aksinia kept her head down, but her ears open. One night, she heard footsteps at her door again. She had already prepared a log and quietly moved the bench closer to the door. The footsteps were familiar, limping, uneven. She recognized them. They belonged to the old man who helped her carry water. He came in, dropped his hat, and said that there was a rumor going around the village that the sheet was not the last piece of cloth that cunning hands would want to get their hands on. He added that in the government laundry, one had to be not only a laundress, but also a guard. He said he had seen someone looking for the chests during the day. She thanked him. He left. She smiled to herself. The underestimated neighbor, whom everyone considered a dim-witted assistant, turned out to be the one who warned her in time. The next day, what she had been expecting happened in the government laundry. She and her assistant were rearranging the canvases when they heard a rustling sound behind the door. The door opened as if touched by eyes. A young man entered, dressed decently, but with a shifty gaze. He said he had come from the owner to pick up a couple of canvases for the holiday decorations. He did not give his name or the exact measurements. Aksinia remembered how the butler liked to send other people's hands. She said she would not give out the canvas without an inventory. The young man said he had the inventory in his memory. She replied that memory was not paper. He looked at her with irritation. His mistake was that he thought a simple laundress would get confused. But she was a keeper. She knew what real records looked like and how cold sweat smelled like lies. At that moment, an old clerk entered the laundry room. He said he had come on business concerning the inventory. The young man turned pale and tried to leave. The clerk ordered him to be detained. He was caught with a note written in forged handwriting, stating that the cloth should be given to this particular person. The handwriting copied that of the district clerk, but was given away by a bump in the letter. The clerk recognized his own handwriting, and the forgery was exposed. The young man was led away. Then it became easier to breathe in the laundry room. After that, the Volost avoided the laundry room out of respect for the cause. Those who had previously spoken harshly to Aksinia now bowed to her. She did not like clans. She loved clean water, but she accepted respect as one accepts a spring shower, without asking for it, but with gratitude. During those days, the bride's father came to her again. He brought a bag of flour. He said he didn't know how to repay her for what she had done for his home. She replied that she had not done it for him, but for the water, which loves cleanliness. He said he wanted the bride to live in a house where she would not be forced to hang other people's sheets out for the neighbors to laugh at. Aksenia thought that if she had her own voice, she would say that it was not about the ritual, but about who performed it and for what purpose. The district order on the case of the government canvas spread to neighboring settlements. Then they began to remember how often strangers hid their lies in women's belongings, as if no traces remained on them. Several young wives returned home without the required demonstration, and no one dared to object. Old women sighed as they looked at their granddaughters. No one became wiser from one day to the next, but many stopped believing that color always tells the truth, and that was already a small victory. The summer dragged on slowly. The full barrels dried up in the sun. The boys caught fish by turning them inside out, and Aksenia got used to her new position. She was now responsible not only for the laundry, but also for the records. She attached tiny scraps of fabric to the inventories so that everyone could see what the fabric looked like on the day it was received. She demanded that the canvases be marked in a way that did not cut the body, but left a mark that was clear to the eye. She taught her assistants to look at the edge. The edge always gives away the hand. She told them that in matters of human honor, edges matter more than they seem. The girls listened, memorized, and their fingers stopped twitching with fear. The butler, as expected, did not want to accept his downfall. He was kept under guard, but his name still hung over the house like a shadow. The master tried to forget him, but forgetting is not a quick process. Once, a woman whispered to Aksenia at the market that at night there was a cart without ropes standing outside the master's house, and the men said that it had been harnessed to transport something heavy. The next morning, it turned out that some lists had disappeared from the house. The master came to the clerk and said that it was probably a conspiracy of the poor against the rich. The clerk grinned and replied that the poor were not skilled enough to copy seals so deftly. He ordered the cattle yard, where the bags with documents were hidden, to be closed and began searching. At that moment, the unsung hero reappeared. It was the old man who helped Aksenia carry water. His name was Lavrenti. He had a lame leg, and no one but her listened to his stories. He said that at night he had seen a man in an old sheepskin coat hanging around the master's house, and under the coat he had a new boot with a shiny buckle. He noticed this because he knew a lot about shoes. In his youth, he had been a shoemaker until his leg became crooked. He added that only one person in the area wore such a buckle, the steward's nephew. His words turned out to be the thread that pulled everything together. The nephew was quickly found. He began to get confused and soon admitted that he had helped carry the papers. He wanted to clear his uncle's name. Allegedly, by returning the papers, they could blackmail the owner. But blackmail no longer worked. Everyone saw that the circle had closed not near the bed, but near the chest with the government money. The clerk put the new evidence together. He said that the case would be sent to the district, and everyone already knew the outcome: forgery, theft of government property, and attempted theft of documents. The peace in the village was shaken, but it did not collapse. The landlord became more modest, and at the market, he began to give way to the peasant women in line for salt. He even sent a bag of good soap to the government laundry. Aksenia accepted it, recorded it, and did not smile. Soon, the bride's father came to the laundry with the bride herself. They brought sheets to be bleached for a new bed in another family. The groom was from a neighboring village, quiet, hard-working, with kind eyes, but his hands still bore the weight of the saka. They asked her to wash them quietly. Aksenia understood that they did not need a new ritual. They needed cleanliness without witnesses. She took the sheets and said she would return them as white as frost on the morning grass, but without prying eyes. She froze them at dawn, rinsed them in cold water, boiled them in lye, making sure that the foam did not disappear from the tub too quickly. She imagined how a new life would begin in a room where conscience would not be suffocated by other people's rules. One of those days, news came to her from afar. They said that an old woman had died in the neighboring village, the very widow her mother had served. Before her death, she had asked that a purse with buttons and a needle be given to the laundress Aksinya. In the purse was a note, saying that the woman had been faint-hearted in her youth, turning a blind eye to other people's misfortunes, but then spent many years looking for ways to restore justice to the world through small deeds. She could barely write, but her letters were strong. Aksinya held the needle in her hands and understood that things sometimes speak louder than words. She decided to take this needle to the bride. Let her have a tool in her house that does not cut, but mends. At the end of the summer, the old clerk gathered people in the yard and said that according to the Volost verdict, the sheet ritual was no longer mandatory in their area, that the family's honor was determined not by a stained sheet, but by choice and reputation. He said that anyone who wanted to put the sheet on display for ridicule could do so, but the court would not consider it evidence. He added that Aksinya would now run the public laundry, and that her word on the cleanliness of the fabric would be taken as expert testimony. He used a simple word, expert. The people in the yard looked at each other, not all of them understanding the new word, but they grasped its meaning. The laundress from the ravine had become someone who was listened to. In the evening, when the Volost courtyard was empty, the same landlord who wanted to blackmail someone else's daughter approached Aksinya. He stood awkwardly, like a man who was uncomfortable with his new speech. He said he wanted to donate money for the inventory so that it would be kept more carefully and no one could forge the seals. He had his own interesting explanation. He said he was doing this not out of fear, but for the sake of order. Order was his excuse. Aksinya nodded. So be it. She knew that people often hid their conscience behind the word order, but it was important to her that the laundry had forms and seals. Life was turning into a steady routine. The laundry room was smoky in the morning and quieted down by nightfall. The maids had learned to work in such a way that the water washed away not only the dirt, but also the noise. Aksinya now had something she hadn't had before: time. She spent her evenings breathing evenly and thinking about her own affairs, about her sister Varvara, about her fiancé, about the old deacon, about how strange things are. A simple piece of cloth, and suddenly it changes the habits of an entire village. She also thought about herself. Her life since childhood had been in water, and her hands were accustomed to the cold. Now, alongside the cold, there was respect, and it warmed her better than a stove. But another twist in this story was waiting for its time. One day, a middle-aged woman in a simple headscarf with a tired face came to the laundress. She said she had come from a distant village, and that she had news for Aksinya. The news was about Varvara. It turned out that her sister had not died that year, as everyone had thought. She had survived, but had gone far away because she was ashamed. She lived in a monastery settlement, sewing for the novices, and had recently died. Before her death, she said that she had a sister who once mended the hem as her mother had taught her. She asked to convey that she always kept in her heart the day she gave up her child. This woman brought the canvas that Varvara had kept. The hem had the same stitching. Aksinya put her palm on the fabric and realized that the circle had closed, but it didn't hurt. The pain of many quarrels was already gone. What remained was a soft emptiness that could be filled with work. The peddler was standing at the autumn market again. He had herbs, roots, and bark. He tried to sell madder to a young wife, saying that it could be used to make a good laundry detergent. The girl looked away, embarrassed. The people around her laughed, but not with the same laughter as before. The laughter became short and cold. Someone said that this was no longer a joke. The peddler blushed and hid the root. There was no miraculous correction of the world. No one became an angel. But there was a new rule in the air. Do not touch someone else's honor with a dye root. One day in late autumn, a boy with a rope in his hands appeared at the doorstep of the laundry room, the same boy who had once stood by the peddler. He asked if they would take him on as an assistant. He said he was tired of other people's orders, where he had to keep quiet when they broke things. He asked to be taught not only how to wash, but also how to watch. Aksenia agreed. She said she would start with the basics: how to hold the tub so that the water flows evenly, how to pour the lye so that the foam retains its strength, how to look at the edge to see the hand. The boy listened as if he had finally been given a tongue that did not lie. A month later, he could already distinguish Marina from cherry juice and did not confuse the smell of alum and iron. At the end of the year, an order came to the district. In neighboring areas, following the example of this parish, the ritual with the sheet was deemed optional, and the areas were instructed to keep more accurate records of fabrics and people. The order did not mention the laundress by name. It only mentioned the word practice, but people knew. They said among themselves that it had started with them, with Aksenia. She did not seek fame. It was enough for her that the water flowed over the stones and did not turn back. On Christmas Day, the bride's father brought a cake to the laundry. He said that their house was quieter now, which was a rare joy. He added that his daughter was expecting a child. He did not say whose child it was, because it was clear without words. It would be theirs, because they had accepted it before it was even born. Aksenia accepted the pie and thought that she did not have much room on the table, but she would put another plate there. She realized that in this story, everyone had found something for themselves. The clerk had a line, the laundress had a job, the master had a lesson, the butler had a punishment, the boy had a craft, and the bride had a life without someone else's sheet. By spring, the government laundry had become a place where people came not only with rags, but also with questions. Neighbors asked how to distinguish clean news from empty news. Aksenia smiled and replied that you had to look at the edge. The edge always gives away the hand. She said that the truth smells simple, like cold water, while lies always try to hide in fragrances. She didn't know big words, but her little words hit the mark because they came from the work she did every day. One spring day, a young woman walked along the road leading to the river. She was carrying a child. He reached for a ray of light that played on the stones in the water. Aksenia looked at them and thought how good it was to be in a world where a sheet was just a piece of cloth and water was just water, where honor does not lie on a bench for strangers to see, where people already know how to distinguish dye from blood, where an old needle mends the edge instead of tearing it. She thought about this and realized that her own edge was also mended, and so ended the story of the bloody sheet without blood. It began with a melodrama about female shame, then became a thriller with nighttime knocks and a stranger's hand, changed genre to social drama, where a poor laundress stood up against the Lord's butler, and ended in catharsis, in which it was not loud words that won, but order that does not smoke. Water, inventory, and darning, which holds the fabric together, won. That's enough to live on without unnecessary shouting. Thank you for listening. I am a male storyteller. Please write in the comments where you heard this story, and may you remember it fondly, like a distant day when the water flowed in the right direction.